So first, to start, I'm going to introduce myself. I'm Yona. I started the Webtoons fan community page on Instagram. It's a page with over 7,000 followers now. I've conducted interviews with over 20 authors, both Canvas and original, which Discover and featured. And I also am the author of Blue and Dire Talk on Webtoon. Why don't you introduce yourself to everybody out there who doesn't know who you are?
All right. Well, I'm Jason Brubaker. I've made several graphic novels now. The first one was called Remind, and I just published it online as a webcomic before Webtoons was around. And then I made this one called Sithra, and then that's when I was approached by Webtoons to publish Sithra on Webtoons. And so I did that for about 2.5 years and did the full Sithra series on there. And yeah, it's a great platform to publish webcomics.
So, jumping off of there, you said that you were approached by Webtoon. I know that most people, they'll start out as an unpaid author. They'll kind of work up their fan base, and then eventually Webtoon will approach them on their platform. It's my understanding that's not the way that it happened with you for Sithra.
Yeah, I think I was just kind of on that front wave when they were really trying to build the clients, build the artist community, and get a lot of comics on the platform. It was also unusual that they asked me to publish a comic that I already started publishing elsewhere, and because now I don't think they do that as much anymore. So yeah, it was really just because I was in the right place at the right time and I had something already finished. They saw Remind and they liked that, and they were actually wanting Remind to be on Webtoons, but I said it would just be too hard for me to convert it because Remind's so strangely built as far as page layouts go. And so they're like, "Well, do you have anything else?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm working on Sithra." And I was only probably 100 pages into the 1,000 pages of Sithra. So they said, yeah, that's cool. Let's do that one. And
Mm.
it's surprising because they didn't have a clue where the story was going, so they kind of just trusted that I would be able to tell a good story. But it was kind of based on them seeing my old work, the Remind work, I think. You know.
And what would you say, since you've worked both with creating graphic novels and on Webtoon, what would you say is the biggest difference between creating art that is scrollable, I guess they call it, and then creating art that is put down into book form?
Um, well, it's a different kind of storytelling, When since I started out developing for the book, I'm always thinking of the double page spread layout and trying to lead people's eyes around the page from the panels. And then when it comes to webtoons, it's more just a downward scrolling. So you're almost stacking the panels. You can get a little creative with how you lead people's eyes down, but it just really meant spending time reconverting everything to that just linear format. And so it's like it's the same with watching TV. You're shown one panel at a time, and so it's kind of more like TV watching, where you're just scrolling through one panel at a time versus trying to control the viewer across the page. So it's a little easier, I think. I think it's harder to make something for webtoons and then convert it to book form than it is to make it for book first and then convert it to webtoons. In my opinion, it is.
I know some people have done that. I believe Space Boy was started as a webtoon and transferred over, but it's unusual to see.
Yeah.
So
Actually, Steven, who does Spaceboy, he does design it as page formats. So he
oh,
actually
really?
turns his monitor sideways and he works one page at a time, but he knows that they're going to stack up on top of each other. And so when he sold the rights to get it printed through, I think, Dark Horse, I think that's who printed it. He kind of had all the pages ready to go, and it just took a little bit of reformatting for him to get it onto the page. So, but he was thinking about that up front.
Right.
So I
That's
think
interesting.
that's a good thing for artists to think about is build it in a way to where you can convert it easily later. A lot of people when they make web comics, they don't make it a very big resolution. They're not thinking about any other format, and I think you're leaving a lot of potential on the table by doing that. So, the
Right.
easiest thing you can do is just make it bigger, a bigger file size, so that you have a lot more to work with.
Now, I did some research and I found out you worked with DreamWorks before Webtoon.
Hmm.
Did you always kind of know or have that vision that you wanted to create comics and graphic novels, or were you creating graphic novels before you worked with DreamWorks? Is it just
Mm.
something you kind of transitioned from?
I started out wanting to do comics, so I wanted to do Spider-Man, work for Marvel and stuff. And then I got into Hollywood through my comic portfolio. I never got a job in comics necessarily, but I got a job doing storyboards in LA. And so that started my career kind of in Hollywood. And then I transitioned from storyboards to animation, and then from animation into went into DreamWorks, was there for about 7 years towards the end of my Hollywood career. And I always had this love for comics though, because that's the first thing I really wanted to do. And so, on the side of on the weekends and at nights, I was working on my own personal stuff, which was Remind, and didn't really know what to do with it, especially once I got into DreamWorks. But that's kind of when web comics started coming out online. There was a lot of the gag a day type comics, but not many long form story comics online. And there was a handful of them. And so I was like, well, I'll just put it online, what I've finished so far, and see if anyone cares. And it grew a following. And so it really started making me realize there's something here. It's not just my friends and family that are reading it anymore.
Right.
And um, so then when I was at DreamWorks for a number of years, it's like every job I've ever had has always been kind of like, I'm kind of getting tired of this. I want to do more with myself, not just be an for hire artist. And so this web comic I kept posting online, and it kept growing. I went to conventions and was selling books, and people were like, "I love this." And so it just Kickstarter came out. I was able to raise about $107,000 on the second book on that. So it just really opened my eyes to this whole idea that I can do my own thing and probably make a living from it. And um, so that kind of started my transition out of Hollywood. Even though I had this great job, worked on all the Kung Fu Panda movies and all that stuff, it was just so much more enjoyable and more fulfilling to just do my own stuff. So I just circled back to my first love, kind of, and now that's what I'm doing full time. I've been doing it about 5 years now, full time. Yeah.
So Sithra was marked completed on Webtoon back in 2018.
Hmm.
Do you have any projects you're currently working on, and would you consider working with Webtoon again if they reached out to you? What's going on?
Um, I developed another project that Webtoons was interested in, and I just haven't reapproached them yet. And part of the reason is because the speed at which I was doing Cithra kind of wore me out for that 2.5 years. Um, and I don't want to I don't want to set it up to where I'm it's a real struggle to get the content done. So preferably, I've always thought I would want to get about a year's worth of content done if I were to go back to Webtoons, and have about a year's worth of stuff ready to go. So it just can kind of be on autopilot as
Right.
I'm working on the rest. And I don't ever envision myself doing a long form one that lasts more than a couple of years. So a year's worth of work, and then I'm working on the second half of it. You know, that would be
Right.
ideal. I've just never had the money set aside to be able to develop a year's worth of content without making any profit on it yet. So I've dabbled in a lot of other things. I've been That project is still in mind. I don't know if it'll be for Webtoons or not. Um, but it's definitely the next serious one I want to pursue. I've also just completed a book called Shapes. It's been published by Cave Pictures Publishing.
Oh,
So, and it's actually on Indiegogo right now. They're collecting it into a hardcover. So we just launched that on Monday. Um, and then Cithra, actually, we just barely finished printing all the books. We have six hardcover books. It's about 1,000 pages total, and I just completed shipping those out to backers last week. So we're still trying to get through some of the international orders, but and then there's another thing I'm working on called Phobos. This I've been just giving to my patrons only. These are little 100-page comics, and eventually I'm going to put this on Kickstarter. It's kind of a spoof on the classic horror characters. Um, and yeah, I'm working on a drawing book called Cognitive Drawing as well, so that I'll be releasing probably next month, or at least starting to pitch it next month. So yeah, there's a bunch of random things. It's, I'm kind of dabbling in a lot of fields and a lot of things, and just trying to figure out what's the best avenues for each different project, you know.
right. And we
So
did lose connection for about a second there, but I think we got everything
okay,
up until your Patreon project.
okay,
I know that in doing some of the interviews with other authors, one of the things that I've found is that time management and setting aside time for themselves is really one of their biggest struggles, because
mhm,
especially with the ones that are getting paid by Webtoon, they have to publish weekly, and then they're also creating content for their Patreons and stuff like that. And what ends up happening that I've observed is they'll get to a point where they're working themselves so hard that they have to take a big, 6 month hiatus, and then everyone's,
yeah.
in an uproar at them.
Mhm.
So, do you have any advice that you could give for maybe artists that are, they're getting paid and they're there, but they're maybe less experienced in the industry, and they haven't quite figured out, how do I set time aside for myself while fulfilling my obligations to the company?
Yeah, and I think that's so I will answer that question, but I think that is the reason I haven't gone back to Webtoons yet, is just because of that problem. It's so much of a struggle to maintain the consistent amount of work that you're producing to meet the demands of the platform. And with Cithra, I had to take 3 month breaks a couple times during the production of Cithra. And it wasn't a break from me drawing, it was a break from posting so that I could get caught up again. And so, and so I wouldn't be paid at that time either. So it was just a real struggle to try to really maintain that. And I think that's the weakest link really for me, with Webtoons. Um, and then yeah, you're dealing with Patreon and all that stuff too. Um, I I don't know if there's any, Webtoons is providing a great opportunity for a lot of young up and coming artists, and so it's but the deadlines are so crushing that it kind of wears out a lot of young artists. I think even more seasoned artists, it wears out, because you really do have to take breaks. You have to take weekends. You have to have vacations. You have to be able to go do holiday things and all that stuff. And if you take that away from an artist, it sucks the joy out of art. Because you're a slave then to the art. You're a slave to the content, and so um, there's no real easy fix other than just knowing like this has to be baked into it. And if that means it doing what I'm doing, which is trying to find other avenues to get paid, so that I can make that schedule work. That's how Shapes came about. Like I was paid to do this. I was paid to write it and draw it and color it. And it took me about a year to do it. But I was able to make do it the schedule that I had that I needed. I could take a month
Right.
off if I was completely burnt out. So it's there's no real easy answer though to it, other than knowing your worth and then knowing you have to, um, that it's okay to say I gotta take breaks regularly. Like as a
Right.
human, we have to sleep. So we also have to take breaks from things that we're doing for a long period of time. Just like the sleep cycle is natural part of our human bodies, we have to like break up these monotonous tasks that we're doing as well. So just be prepared if you're pursuing webtoons. Like you have to kind of build that into the schedule, like build those necessary breaks into the schedule, and don't be afraid to if you are featured on webtoons. I don't think you should be afraid to say, hey, I need 2 weeks off. Whether
Right.
you pay me or not, I just need 2 weeks off every 2 months or whatever it is. Like I have to have some time to recuperate here. So the other strategy, is just creating a really simple, quick style that you can hammer through quickly. And I see a lot of artists doing that on Webtoons. It's not attractive for me because I want my stuff to be kind of that really finished, more polished looking stuff. That's not just it's not quantity over quality, you know. And
Right.
so that's one of the other places that I'm it's hard for me to go back to webtoons until I have like that year's worth of content done at the quality level I want, to give me that buffer, to give me the so that I can actually publish something that has the quality level I'm happy with. All those factors play into that decision. So
Right.
and it's hard because everyone has to make money. So it's like how do you juggle that? And it's not an easy question to answer. I'm still juggling it all. For me, a lot of my money making is through Kickstarters and Indiegogo campaigns. I'll print the books and try to come out with more profit to cover the months uh, for the production of the next books that I'm working on. You know,
Right.
so yeah, that's a hard one though.
So, well, that's why I'm here. I do remember I posted an art comparison a while back with I don't know if you know Uru-chan, author of Unordinary.
Mm-mm.
And people were criticizing the new art, saying that it kind of seemed more simplistic, something along those lines. And really looking at it, the old art was just not sustainable, in my opinion. They were drawing each individual hair and
Mhm.
um, things along that line. Very, very detailed backgrounds. And this is someone who, again, is expected to post every single week. So I think that
Yeah.
people, need to realize that there's a lot more work that goes into it than maybe
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
know.
And that's
So,
necessary.
what are
Steven's Space Boy, he purposely designed a simple style so that he could hit those deadlines. And even that is tiring and wears on him. Um, so yeah, it's one of those things that's it's hard because I'm in love with the more not complicated, but I don't want to go too simple. And if that's the way I am forced to go, then I would rather not do it. And
right,
so it's kind of like those are the decisions each artist has to make. Like Webtoons is a publisher, so they're they're selecting content that kind of fits their audience and fits their time frame and all that stuff. And so just like any other publisher, if your content fits into that style, that more simplified like long content, then it's perfect for people. It still means you're going to be on the weekly grind trying to get the deadlines, but yeah, you can't expect people to maintain a really high detail style
right.
and be able to hit those deadlines. Yeah, it's tricky. Sorry, go on.
So that's quite all right. I love it when people go off. It gives me more content. So you've been in the industry a while now. You've worked with a lot of different people, I presume. What are some artists and authors that inspire you to this day, and people that you admire, whether you've worked with them or not?
One of the bigger inspirations in film is Miyazaki's animation and books. I just I love his stuff, and I think still to this day I try to create my worlds in the same way I that I see him creating his. I try to just pull back the curtains and give people a snapshot, or access to this weird world, this weird environment, and just allow people to live there for a little bit. And um, it's so neat. His work can really transcend culture, and like I don't understand the culture at all of Miyazaki, but I can still embrace it and love it, and be a part of it, in his movies. And so anyway, he's one of the biggest inspirations as far as my storytelling I think goes, and the way I try to have the mood and feeling of my comics, especially Sithra. Sithra was a hugely, like, I wanted to make my version of a Miyazaki film. Was kind of, that's what Sithra was like about. So it's not what it was about, but it was inspired by that. The style. Um,
Right.
there's a lot of artists that I have worked with, that I've learned a lot from, like at DreamWorks, obviously too. Just different art directors like Tang Hang, who is the art director of Kung Fu Panda. The production designer of Kung Fu Panda was Ramon Zebach, who is just, he makes my head explode when it comes to like his simplified color theory that's so mind blowing. I don't know, and it's hard to find these guys' work online, but it's just, these guys are at such another level of talent when it comes to just being able to put stuff together that's visually stunning with just like two brush strokes. Um, and so that's really, I think, inspired my more recent work, is those type of guys, to just be able to do a simpler process with the knowledge of the color theory and stuff I've built over the last 20 years, and it's not saying, it's not like the simplifying of, like, say, webtoons, like speed. It's more just, I don't know how to explain it, because you look at some of these guys' work and it's like breathtaking, but it's really super simple, but it's not like they did it in 2 seconds. I don't know. I don't know how to
Right.
explain it. So anyway, there's those kind of guys, and it's kind of encouraged me to speed up and be fine with the mistakes, but then but there's still that quality level. And that only comes with doing it over and over and over and over again, and experience, and seeing how other people are doing it like that. There's also, a lot of the comic artists from the 90s that I grew up reading, that are that have always inspired my comic work, like Eric Larson and Sam Keith and Todd McFarlane and Jim Lee, those kind of guys, which
Right.
I haven't worked with any of them. Actually, Sam Keith emailed me after my first book was online, and he's like, "I'm a big fan of your work. I like how you color it." And I'm like, "Wait, this is your Sam Keith. I'm a big fan of your work. This isn't right." And so he
It's
actually
not.
did a pinup of my characters for the back of my first graphic novel of Remind, and that was just kind of a surreal moment. So,
Right.
yeah.
So you have gained over 80,000, I believe, subscribers on YouTube. You've worked with Webtoon, with DreamWorks, and a number of other places. What would you say, in your personal opinion, are some of your greatest achievements?
Oh, well, I haven't had quite that many subscribers on YouTube, but um, really just the well, okay, so there's some great achievements in Hollywood that I'm really proud of, like working on the Kung Fu Panda movies. Those are some of the better projects I've been hired to work on. Um, and then, but really recently, it hasn't been until recently that I feel like I'm doing the things that I've always kind of dreamed of doing, which is publish, like putting out my own stories, and like the undertaking of starting a publishing company and actually being able to deliver on these really high quality books. It's just like, that's really satisfying to me, and that's
Right.
that's the thing that it's really hard to find other people that are doing it completely independently. There's a lot of people that have published things, but there's not a lot of people who've started a publishing company and then done 15 books and so that's really, I'm really proud of that and really happy that that's continuing. I can't say it's like super, I'm making super money from it, but the thing is, I'm building this bookshelf of intellectual property that I completely own, every little bit of it. And so one some year, I'll have just a library of 20 different things that I could be selling intellectual property rights to studios for various things. And so that's the best thing I feel like I've done as far as my career goes. It's the most
Right.
exciting anyway. And it has the most potential, it has the kind of the unlimited ceiling. And that's what's exciting to me. When you have just an art job, you kind of have this, you're kind of refined to a certain amount of pay. And I mean, you can move up the ladder and continue to grow and stuff, but you're always kind of in this box. And it doesn't feel like that now. Now it's all entrepreneurial ideas. It's just like coming up with ideas, pitching them, trying to figure out how to make money, and continuing to just put out stuff. And it's just a whole new world, really, and it's exciting, it's fun, and there's unlimited potential with it. It's just a matter of continuing to do it.
Right.
So, I know I just trailed all over with that answer.
It's okay. So, uh, I have probably a good dozen young artists just starting out on Webtoon
Hmm.
message me probably every month, asking me, can you promote me? Can you do this? That trying to build a name for themselves.
Hmm.
Um, and they're putting a lot of focus into their art, which is good. But they are struggling, kind of, I guess, to find a footing in the industry. Do you have any advice for people who are just, starting out ground level
Mm,
in comics and
yeah.
webtoon?
My my biggest advice is you have to, like, my career was built on personal projects. And so um, I got into Hollywood because I had uh, done about 400 pages of comic books for personal projects and random things uh, before I ever got a job. And so, and that's before Webtoons, before the internet, or before I could easily post stuff online. Because that was 20 years ago, 25 years ago now. And, um, and then working in Hollywood, it was just like a lot of like quick turnaround type stuff. So it was a lot of on-job education and learning from a lot of different directors and stuff like that. But the thing that really advanced my careers was always like finding a personal project to work on. Like I started working on a animated thing. I wanted to learn how to animate while I was doing storyboards, and that turned into Remind, and that got me into animation jobs, and then that got me eventually into DreamWorks. Um, and then I wanted to, I started doing the graphic novels, and then that turned into this career. And it's like when I transitioned from animation into VizDev, visual development at DreamWorks, I used my personal comic as my portfolio, as my main portfolio. And so it's really about doing the personal projects, finishing them, and then getting them in front of people. And so the problem with, young people starting out is they don't have the experience, they haven't gone through that learning process yet. They're eager to get the jobs, and I know I was there. There was years and years where I was like, I'm getting really good. Why is no one paying attention? Um, it's because you got to be really, really good before people pay attention. There's a lot of artists, but there's not a lot of artists that are really, really, really good. You know, not saying
Right.
I, not saying I'm really, 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 really good, but you have to do things that turn people's heads. You can't just be at the same level as 100,000 other people who are trying. You
Right.
have to be at the next level. And so that means putting in years and years of work on personal projects that you love. It means finishing them, continuing, like finish one and start a new one. And eventually you'll get to this breaking point to where enough people will start seeing it and saying, "Hey, I want you to do that for me," you know. And
Right.
that's when you start getting approached by companies and people, and something like Webtoons would show up and knock and say, "Hey, can you see that last comic you did? I want you to do that for me now." And
Right.
so there's this great quote that luck is preparation meets opportunity. And if you're not prepared for the opportunity, then you're not going to get the opportunity. So being prepared means if you want to be a comic artist who gets noticed by Webtoons, you need to have made 10 different comic stories. You need to have completed probably 100, 200, 500, or 1,000 pages of comics on your own. And suddenly, not suddenly, but over that time, you've gained these skills that can really get noticed.
Right.
So it's not a fast track by any means to any sort of great career. The artist's career is really long, labor intensive, and hard. And we're always battling, like, the voices in our head. We're always, trying to we're always self-critical of what we're doing. And then you put your art out there and everyone else is always critical of it. If you get a job, the main thing you notice is you're only pointed out the things that are wrong with it. And so it's just like it's just this continuous, like hammering and chiseling what you can do to be better and better and better. And then finally you're at this
Right.
point where it's like you're good and everyone's starting to notice you. And it seems like it happened overnight for everyone else, but it took you 10 years to get there, you know?
Right.
So that's the main thing. Do personal projects just like what people are doing on Webtoons, but don't look at this first thing on Webtoons that you're doing as the thing that's going to make your whole career. This is the first of 20 projects, 20 stories, or whatever it is that you're working on. And look at it like that. Be realistic with that expectation. Do the best you can, but then do better on the next one, you know? So I think a lot of it's just a realistic expectation. Nowadays, it's really easy to think you can just put something online and you'll be noticed and have millions of subscribers. But, we don't, it's just because we don't know what went into things. We don't know the real
Right.
story behind it. All we're seeing is what's posted, you know. So
Yeah.
hopefully
And
that helps.
I know there is that temptation for a lot of people to chase kind of, I guess, working cliches like storylines and genres and art styles that they see working for other people. And so they, automatically think, oh, that's going to work for me.
Yeah.
The statistics, I think the last time I saw them, the 8 out of the top 10 webtoons in America were romance comics.
Hmm.
Um, and so a lot of people will, make that and hope that that'll be their, breakthrough.
Yeah.
I try and encourage people to steer to their own course, but
Yeah. Yeah.
how did you get into art?
Oh, I just drew all ever since I can remember. When I was really little, I was really obsessed with like the not Saturday, the Sunday comics, in the newspaper. And so it was like Calvin and Hobbes and um, uh, Garfield and The Far Side, and these kind of comics were just like wow, this is one artist doing this whole thing, and that was really exciting. And they're all different styles. And so I just wanted to do my own thing like that. I wasn't really interested in Disney and all that stuff because it was like you're being told to do the Disney style, and I don't want to do the Disney style. I want to do my style. And so I was really fascinated with these artists that were just doing their own thing, and then Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, that comic, like that kind of thing. Um, And then that's why I got into like the comic books. Like when Image started, all these artists left Marvel Comics to start Image, and they were just doing their style and their books, and that was just amazing. So it kept the fire going, and I just tried to imitate all those things. Like I had a little comic strip about a dog that I made when I was, 9, 10, 11 years old, and when I was 11, it got published in the local paper once a week because my teacher knew the editor. It was a small town, so it's not a big deal, but it gave me like this kind of reassurance, like, hey, if I just focus on doing this stuff that I love, like, people can notice it, and then suddenly I'm in the paper, publishing a weekly strip. That's pretty cool at age 11. So I think that's kind of what started me on this whole idea of like do the personal projects, and it's kind of never let me down since. Um, so yeah, it's just been ever since I can remember. I can never remember a time when I didn't like to draw and I didn't just want to go to my room and create something on paper.
Right. And you said Remind was your first kind of big project. When would you say, what age do you say you started Remind and
Mm,
and and that project?
let's see. I was. It took me about. Well, so first it started out as an animation. I worked on that for about 7 years, and then I decided to do it as a graphic novel, and that took about 15 years. No, I'm sorry, that took another 7 years. So in total, it's about a 15-year process from its inception to the end, and that was probably early 30s for that was when I was probably 30 when I started working on it as the animation. So that was kind of the inception of the idea. Um, yeah, because I'm almost 45 now. So no, so I guess it would be earlier than that. It'd probably be like 25 when I was like 25-ish. Um, because yeah, I've been done with Remind for years now. I'm acting like I just finished it. So yeah, um, yeah, it's a long process. Looking back, I'm like, oh my goodness, I spent a lot of time. But it's how you learn it. So,
Right. If you did it now, do you think you could do it in less time?
oh yeah,
Yeah.
the first book of Remind took me about 5 years to do it. The second one took me about 2 years, and then Sithra one took me about a year, and then Sithra two took me about 4 months. And these are all like 150-page comics, like graphic novels. And so now my speed is about I can if it's my own personal project and I have it all figured out, kind of like the characters and stuff, I can knock it out in about 6 months for a decent sized graphic novel now. You know, and that's the speed that's kind of the max I want to do. Any faster than that, then um, it's getting into the webtoon speed, which is too
Right.
much. It's too fast, and you need that time to kind of just be able to let it mature almost.
Right. Did you go through schooling for art, or did you jump right in for it into the industry? And
I just jumped in. So I was just drawing a lot when I was a kid. And then when I was graduating high school, I was really trying to get into comics. So I made a lot of submissions and submitted them. And then it was shortly after that I went to a convention and showed my work to everybody there, and then was noticed by an agent who represented storyboard artists, and so he approached me and gave me his card, and then that turned into me moving to LA and starting the whole career in Hollywood. Um, yeah, I don't even remember what your question was now. Did I answer it?
uh, yeah, you did. Um, so would you? I know some people, um, mostly in other walks of life, not necessarily art, but they do a lot of conventions, and they set up booths, and they go to probably at least one convention per month, if not more. Um, for comics, would you say that having a person who wants to get into the industry, for them, would it be beneficial to get a booth at a Comic Con and set up there, or do you think that there are other ways that are, better for that?
Um, I don't do conventions very much anymore, and it's mainly because I just have these really big, heavy books, and so it's logistically difficult for me to get there and set up all my stuff, and it costs a lot of money to have
Right.
that kind of booth space. I really think conventions is kind of an old school way to do it. There are huge benefits to conventions, though, when you're starting out, especially because there's connections with other artists, which are invaluable. There's putting your product in front of someone and seeing how they react is really invaluable. Um, it's hard to know how people are going to respond to your stuff until you um, showcase it to people and watch 1,000 people walk by. Then you start getting an idea if you have something that's attracting people's attention or if people just don't care. And you need to keep going back to that drawing board, you know? So in that sense, it's really valuable because you can learn a lot about that. And it teaches you how to sell. If you're going to be an artist, you have to be able to sell your stuff. You have to be able to sell yourself. And so that's valuable too with conventions, because it's that one-on-one. I'm trying to sell someone this thing. Can I do it? Is the product just not good enough? Is that cover good? Is it, what are people looking at the most on my table? And
Right.
what's too expensive? What's too cheap? So all this stuff is great for conventions, and so I do recommend people doing it for a while. I don't think it's the answer to necessarily building the audience. I don't think it's the answer um, to anything other than educating yourself on how to sell your stuff and making friends and connecting with other artists and learning how to sell your stuff and seeing if it actually sells. What's really valuable now is just being present online, doing what you're doing. This is more valuable to me than conventions. Um, and I've taken polls of my audience to see where do people discover me from, and it's podcasts, it's YouTube videos that I make, it's live stream shows on my channel or someone else's channel, it's blog articles I've written or whatever. It's Kickstarter campaigns or Indiegogo campaigns. People discover me there, or webtoons. So it's not surprisingly for me. It's not social media at all. I've kind of abandoned a lot of social media because it's I think it's a good way to communicate with your fans who you have, but it's not a way to discover new fans. At least in my case, it's hard to discover new fans. They find me in other ways, and then they
Right.
subscribe to social media. So yeah, so online, is really the thing. Like when I made the web comics and put them online, whether it's on my personal site or Webtoons, these are just all so valuable because you're allowing people to experience your stuff and find it easily in their home. They don't have to pay $50 for a convention ticket and then go find you at this obscure corner of the convention between
Right.
someone who makes jewelry and someone who's doing tattoos, you know, and and then you don't have to awkwardly pitch them. But that pitching process is good for you as the artist trying to learn how to sell. But the most valuable thing now is just being online, um, communicating with people online, and putting your stuff online, putting your best work online. Like just put it all out there, and trickle it out continually if you can. You know,
Right.
and that will beat conventions any day. So, prior to the internet, conventions was the place to go discover new artists and comics and stuff. But nowadays, it's more of a place to learn and to meet artists, to make connections. But it's not the place to build your audience necessarily. You know.
Yeah, I actually found you before I read Sithra, I found you on YouTube because I was big in the Webtoons community, but I wanted to know more about the authors, and I also wanted information that I couldn't find on Webtoon, like,
Yeah.
you know, uh, what is the payment process for Webtoon?
Yeah.
What is the publishing process, etc. So I looked up just flatline Webtoon interviews, on YouTube. You were the first person that popped up, and then
Oh,
later
cool.
on, I had Sithra. So
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
I found it through YouTube.
Yeah.
Um,
Cool.
we are going on 45 minutes, so this will be the
Okay.
last question. Uh,
Okay.
I end all of my interviews by asking if there's one message that you have for, either your fans or potential fans or just in general to finish it off, what would that be? And so the platform is yours, and here we are.
Awesome. Well, since your audience is kind of like artists and creators, I'd say finish a personal project. That's the most important thing you can do for you to advance your career, whether it's a career working for someone else doing art or a career making your own things. Personal projects, make them, finish them, put them out there into the world. That's all I've been doing.
Well, thank you very much for agreeing
Yeah,
to do this with me. It was great meeting you.
you're welcome.
Uh, Appreciate it.
And can you send people over to coffeetablecomics.com and
Absolutely.
they can join my mailing list and they'll get a free download of Remind Volume 1 if they do that. And then I'll let them know when I have a Kickstarter or anything like that.
I will plug your link everywhere that I can.
Very good.
All right.
All right.
Thank you.
Good talking to you.
You as well.